don't get around much anymore.
What's the matter with you, Duke? Do something! Shut up! Shut up! Give me time to think!
Ele interpretou gangsters, mas nasceu na alta sociedade.
I was willing to shoot Captain Reno, and I'm willing to shoot you.
All right, Major, you asked for it.
Ele era o solitário elegante que acabou estrelando o filme mais romântico de todos os tempos. Ele era o homem de meia-idade que cortejou a jovem mais linda de Hollywood.
I like that. I'd like more.
Humphrey de Forrest Bogart nasceu no dia de Natal de 1899.
He was born to a wealthy doctor in New York City on the north part of Manhattan. He was given a very sort of society upbringing as New York had around the turn of the 20th century.
Os pais o mandaram para uma das escolas mais exclusivas da América e, embora fosse brilhante, ele estava entediado e não passou nos exames.
His mother was an artist, his father was a doctor. He was not going to be an artist, he was not going to be a doctor. He didn't know what the hell he was going to be. So when World War I came along, they didn't know at the time it was World War I, but when the Great War came along, he joined the Navy. He was only 17 years old, and he says that that's how he got that scar, but there are diverse opinions about that, too.
There are a number of stories about how he got the scar, some very heroic, most of those false. The best story is that he was socked in the mouth by a prisoner he was escorting who tried to escape him.
Ele foi jubilado e então teve de tentar achar uma carreira, mas a ideia de trabalhar o incomodava.
He was a boozer and a brawler, sort of from a young age, not to the point where it got him in trouble with the law, but certainly, he didn't care for any of the pretenses that he was raised into, polite society, debutante balls. I mean, if he had followed the upbringing that he was meant for, he might have been a banker somewhere. But he kicked against that from the outset.
Through a pal of his that he met in the Navy, a fellow named Brady, Brady's father was a big man in the theater, William Brady. And so he got a job as a stooge in the theater, sweeping it up, and then he became a stage manager. And he got the theatrical bug. And then it occurred to him that he could make more money on the stage than sweeping it. So he started to understudy small parts. The rumor is that he was the first juvenile to come in, make a stage entrance and say, "Tennis, anyone?"
Ele fez vários papéis em comédias insignificantes e em melodramas.
He was trying to be a young romantic lead, but didn't really have, not the attributes. He looked okay. He never looked quite pretty enough. It was an inner thing. There was a reluctance inside to be romantic and charming. I don't think Bogart liked charm. And if you asked him to be charming, he turned sour and sullen.
Bogart estava com os olhos em Hollywood e fez seu primeiro filme em 1930, Broadway's Like That. Mas os executivos do estúdio não gostaram muito dele e no ano seguinte ele voltaria para Nova York. Na época, os jornais estavam repletos de fotos de John Dillinger, ladrão de banco, assassino e inimigo público número 1. Esse fugitivo daria a Bogart sua primeira chance.
He was about 33 or 34. He debuted in Robert Sherwood's play The Petrified Forest on Broadway as Duke Mantee, the killer, a thinly veiled John Dillinger character. And when Bogart walked out onto stage, he bore a resemblance to Dillinger. He was lanky, he had a 3-day growth of beard, he looked disheveled and desperate.
He didn't have all that many lines in The Petrified Forest, but when he was on the stage, he overpowered it. I mean, he had that gun in his lap, and he just looked around, and everybody waited for what he was going to say and what he was going to do.
Bogart contracenou com o ator inglês Leslie Howard. A peça fez tanto sucesso que a Warner Brothers comprou os direitos para o cinema.
Bogart called Leslie Howard and said, Leslie, I'd like to do that part on the screen with you. And Leslie Howard said, you're going to do that part on the screen with me. And he called Jack Warner and said, no Bogart, no Leslie Howard.
And that's how Bogart sort of got the big breakthrough in the movies, his breakthrough part. In gratitude, he named his first son, Stephen Leslie, after Leslie Howard.
On the edge of the American desert lies a forest turned to stone, the petrified forest. Grim, silent, mysterious. Here in a lonely desert tavern, fate draws together a strange company. Gramp Maple, the sly old reprobate, and Duke Mentee, vicious leader of an Atores band of gunmen, hiding out after a gang massacre. In a short space of 24 eventful hours, these characters live a lifetime of romance, adventure, terror, and tragedy.
Just keep in mind that I and the boys is candidates for hanging. The first time any one of you makes a wrong move, I'm going to kill the whole lot of you.
He's a hoodlum, nasty, snarling, uncouth, unshaven. Today, he would use foul language. In those days, of course, he was not able to. But he would knock women around. He's a killer. He's an animal.
What were you saying?
I'm telling you for your own good, Mentee. They know where you're heading. They picked up your trail. And they'll get you.
What's the matter with you, Duke? Do something.
Shut up! Shut up!
Give me time to think.
O filme fez muito sucesso e Bogart foi contratado pelo Warner, um estúdio especializado em filmes de gangster. Bogart tornou-se um modelo.
He did for years variations of the Duke Mentee role, and he was killed more often by Murderers Row there, Jimmy Cagney and Edward G. Robinson and George Raft than anybody else. In every picture he ever made with him, he always ended up dead.
You know just where I was hiding, didn't you? Well, you made a mistake. Not as big a mistake as you're liable to make. Well, lucky last time, but you ain't gonna be now.
These were great actors. I don't know that George Raft was, but certainly Paul Mooney was. Certainly Edward G. Robinson and James Cagney were. And they were pretty picky about the parts they took. So there had to be someone lined up by the studios to take their place. And it was Humphrey Bogart.
You started this racket. You ought to have a share in it.
I suppose Mr. Blake will let me have it.
You'll have nothing to say about it. I'm running things from now on.
Como gangster mais novo, ele fez bandidos como Rox Valentine, Glove Donahue, Chips Maguire e Bugs Cunner, terminando cada filme baleado, eletrocutado, envenenado ou decapitado. Em um filme, ele foi devorado por um leão.
For years and years, he played tough gangsters in parts which people like Edward G. Robinson and James Cagney refused.
That was his career at Warner Brothers, mostly typecast.
Havia pouco controle de qualidade para os papéis de Bogart. Ele fazia dúzias de filmes por ano e pegava os papéis que o dono do estúdio Jack Warner mandava.
Oh, Jack Warner is the typical 1930s Hollywood movie producer. Big, blustery, cigar-chomping vulgarian, you know, red meat-eating, martini-drinking, secretary-pinching, that type of guy.
Anytime anybody would say something to Warner that Warner didn't approve of, he'd say, come here, let's go over here. And he'd walk you over to the window and he said, you see that tower up there? The water tower, you see what it says? It says Warner Brothers. That's me. I run the studio. Don't tell me what's right and what's wrong.
Jack was the guy who ran the joint, and he was a titan. You know, he would come walk by the writers' bungalows on the Warner Brothers lot and complain that he didn't hear the typewriters going, as if, you know, it was a printing press, and if it wasn't running, he wasn't getting words or work out of them.
No final dos anos 30, Bogart era um ator da Warner Brothers que fazia papéis cada vez mais inadequados. Ele foi até escalado para fazer um cowboy.
Bogart was not exactly a Western character. He made a Western with James Cagney called The Oklahoma Kid, and he was dressed all in black.
Put it away, Hanley. Kid, I want to talk to you.
Go ahead and talk.
I want that Indian money.
I'll go and get it from the Indian.
Kid, I'm giving you a break because I'm pressed for time.
All right. Now, come on, get over here, all of you.
And I think that Bogart realized it, that he never again either got on a horse or strapped on a 44. He went to the 38s and the Lugers after that.
They realized that he would be a good utility man. They could put him in anything. Now, they didn't see him as a leading man, I mean, he wasn't that type of person, you know. He looked like a character man. But they could put him in different situations. Sometimes he was the good guy, sometimes he was the bad guy, sometimes he was in the middle.
I mean, the worst stuff he made was when Jack Warner said, put a white streak in your hair and play a villain in a horror movie, you know, that sort of thing.
You told them about me.
I didn't have to. They found out for themselves.
You're lying. Does he know everything?
No, only that I brought you back to life.
I should really kill you, Flake, for what you've done to me.
Gentlemen, I am responsible for the...
Working was very important to Mr. Bogard. Here we were in the Depression, coming out of the Depression and so forth, and he had a paycheck, a weekly paycheck, and he was being renewed, and he was working hard. He was in all kinds of pictures, playing things that, in some cases, Western characters, which of course was rather ludicrous, but he worked.
He was not a big public draw, and I think he was unhappy because of it. I mean, he went through the 30s, and I think he knew he hadn't really made it yet. He was not as big as he wanted to be.
Veja a seguir, depois de interpretar gangster e outros vilões, Humphrey Bogart prova que também é um grande ator romântico.
The world will always welcome lovers as time goes by.
Depois do intervalo.
Estamos apresentando Humphrey Bogart.
Ai, que amor! A Vivian é alemã, tá, da onde é? De Berlim, tava aqui de férias, conheceu o Beto, ficou apaixonada. Vamos casar. Pega o celular aí, vamos ligar pra mamãe pra contar a novidade.
Não vamos ligar de casa, o celular é super caro.
Não é, o 23 fez uma coisa maravilhosa. O preço do DDI no celular é igualzinho estivesse em casa. Pode ligar. Liga, é tipo, barato. Fala pra mamãe. Vivian já é local, já sabe tudo de Brasil. Sabe que o Beto é um fofo e sabe que tem que gravar 23, 0023. Você gravou?
Hoje eu tô pra baixo na maior TPM. Sabe o que eu vou fazer? Eu vou mudar a cor dos meus cabelos com Coleston. E aí, gostou? Eu amei. Coleston, além de cobrir aqueles brancos feios, me deu uma cor maravilhosa, encheu os meus cabelos de vida. E pensar que eu tava me sentindo horrorosa. Agora eu tô linda, quase assim uma celebridade.
Coleston da Vela tá pintando uma nova mulher.
Peraí, o que uma celebridade tá fazendo em casa?
Oi, meu nome é Fé.
Luiz Carlos, sou de Salvador, lá da Bahia.
Férias na Espanha. Oi, cheguei de Boston.
O último show foi em Londres. Miami.
Miami? Sim, Miami.
American.
American.
Ela é pontual, é bastante confortável.
Bogart tinha 40 anos, um ator indistinto em filmes desconhecidos, com uma carreira estagnada.
The movies had always sort of presented black hat, white hat, good, bad, romantic, funny, or sad, or scary. You know, the simple emotions of the Hollywood movies of the 30s really didn't suit Bogart. You know, if you put him in a straitjacket, he looked uncomfortable.
I don't think somebody like Jack Warner understood what a big star he was creating. I don't think Bogart understood that he was ever going to be a big star.
I mean, he was working and he was getting raises, but not getting into the big league until really High Sierra.
Mighty Mount Whitney, looming above the wilderness with the strange silence of eternity. Yet stranger still is the mission of destiny that brings men to this forbidding barrier. Held at bay by the most dangerous killer since Dillinger. Look at him up there.
What's the matter, Yellow? Come and get me, buddy. Come and get me.
He's trapped because man can't climb any higher, and men never came any tougher. But what brought him here? What made him
Seu
that
último
way?
refúgio foi um marco para Bogart e também o início de uma cooperação com um roteirista que se tornaria um dos maiores nomes de Hollywood.
John Huston was a man who came to the movies as a writer, but he'd been many things. He'd been an adventurer, he'd been a gambler, he'd been a horseman, and Bogart believed in that real world, and he believed in real men, and I think he identified something in Bogart that was different from the rather more plastic quality in a lot of actors, and a genuine friendship developed between them, which was important for both of them.
Well, I was a writer at Warner Brothers in the 30s, and
Bogart was a contract actor there. I used to see him on the lot, and we became friends. Presently, I wrote a picture that Bogart did, High Sierra.
Please don't send me back to L.A. Let me stay. I want to be with you, Roy. Please let me stay, please.
Bogart interpreta gangster em fuga que faz amizade com uma jovem deficiente.
I'm giving you a chance to blow. If you decide to stick, I'll shoot the first one that don't do as I tell him.
It's the beginnings of that tough, fatalistic loner that is the basis of the Bogart persona. It just began to happen, and I think what happened with Bogart is that a few movie roles helped build this persona, almost inadvertently.
Seu último refúgio fez tanto sucesso que John Huston ganhou a chance de dirigir pela primeira vez. Ele fez a refilmagem de um filme desconhecido chamado Relíquia Macabra.
The original intention was to have George Raft play it, but he pulled away from it because he didn't want to trust his career to a young director, to someone who had never directed before. And Bogart, to my secret delight, was substituted. And that picture began, I think, a whole new career for Bogey.
Na época, George Raft era o ator durão mais famoso da Warner.
I'm just thinking of all the time I wasted with dames like Morty and Iris. If you can't have a woman like her, you're better off with nothing.
And I asked George Raft, I said, Georgie, why did you turn down the Maureen Falcon? He said, well, number one, it was a remake. They had already done it 2 times before, once with Ricardo Cortez, another time with Warren Williams and Betty Davis, of all people. And he said, I didn't want to make a remake. 3 strikes and you're out. It had been made twice already. That was one reason. Another reason, there was a first-time director, a fellow named John Huston, who had never directed before. He said, I didn't want to work with a first-time director. And the third thing was he did not want Mary Astor, who was already cast, as his leading woman. He said, the hell with it, I'm not going to do it. And, of course, that was really the thing that set Bogart off when he played Sam Spade. And, of course, he got top billing in that, and he got top billing from then on. Could I light the cigar again?
What have you ever given me besides money? You ever given me any of your confidence, any of the truth? Haven't you tried to buy my loyalty with money and nothing else?
What else is there I can buy you with?
Em Relíquia Macabra, Bogart faz um detetive que procura uma valiosa estatueta em uma história de traição e mulheres misteriosas.
I don't care who loves who. I won't play this out for you.
I've been bad. Worse than you could know.
Warner Brothers began to get it. They saw that this guy had something that men admired. You know, he was tough, he was cynical, he was his own man, but they saw that he was appealing. He was, he looked good holding a woman.
Huston is a terrific director, a terrific entertainment director, perfect for Bogart, in that they had the same general sense of an ideal hero, this tough, hard-bitten hero who wouldn't buy any talk of ideology or ideals, a loner who looked after himself. They both believed in the same sort of person.
We were talking about a lot more money than this.
There are more of us to be taken care of now.
Well, that may be, but I've got the Falcon.
You may have the Falcon, but we certainly have you.
Stop it. The police will be here any minute. Now talk.
Oh, how can you accuse me of such a terrible...
This isn't the time for that schoolgirl act. We're both of us sitting under the gallows.
When he was allowed to play multiple moods at once, tough and romantic and a little shady and sort of true blue at once, very difficult thing to do, then he sort of blossomed.
Humphrey Bogart finalmente se tornava um astro. Embora tivesse acertado a vida profissional, sua vida pessoal estava tumultuada. Na Broadway ele teve 2 casamentos fracassados, mas logo que chegou em Hollywood, conheceu a atriz Mayo Matot e um caso irracível teve início.
Humphrey Bogart and Mayo Matot.
He met Mayo Matot on a picture that he made at Warner Brothers. It was called Marked Woman. And Betty Davis won an Academy Award for it. Mayo Matot won Humphrey Bogart, and Bogart won a hangover because, for the next 5, 6, 7 years, he hardly drew a sober breath because she was a bona fide alcoholic, and he kept her company.
This was one of those great sort of plate-throwing Hollywood marriages. They were drinkers, they were fighters, the battling Bogarts they were known as, and they really made headlines. They were actually in gossip columns, famous for the sort of marital fisticuffs in which they engaged.
Duke Wayne's son told me a story that Duke Wayne was sitting at a bar one night, probably over at the athletic club, and all of a sudden Bogart staggers in and sits down next to him. And Duke looks over and says, "God almighty, Bogey." He saw a dagger sticking out of his back, not a dagger, but a knife. He says, "You've been stabbed." And he says, "Yeah." He says, "I just had a fight with Mayo." So they took him to an emergency room and stitched him up.
I think he was not an easy person. And I think Mayo may have had very real complaints about him, just as he had about her.
You must remember this, a kiss is just a kiss, a sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by.
Ele foi eleito o filme mais romântico de todos os tempos, mas seu começo não foi brilhante. Sua filmagem foi barata, foi escrito depressa e todos os envolvidos, até Bogart, achavam o filme horrível. Porém, mais de 60 anos depois da sua produção, ele ainda é tão marcante quanto no dia em que foi lançado.
Very simple, but beautifully done. Fabulously shot, cast, great dialogue, full of great moments. It's one of the 10 great all-time Hollywood films.
Luck in the fortune of George Raft's blank stare came into Bogart's life yet again when Raft didn't want to make Casablanca because he thought it was a little too exotic for him to play. It's a film set in a foreign country, involved European politics. And if that guy had a whit of sense, we might not be talking about Bogart today because he turned down 3 pictures better than any he ever made.
Casablanca was probably the luckiest set of circumstances that ever fell into a soundstage here. It was based on a play that nobody ever went and saw. Everybody Goes to Rick's, or Everybody Comes to Rick's. And it didn't start out to be much because, well, it was almost a B picture.
At the time, the project was held in such low esteem by Jack Warner that they were considering making it with Ronald Reagan, who was a real B-movie actor. Bogart had moved into the next tier by then.
What you had when people went to see it was a perfect story about American mistrust of the rest of the world, American isolation, the lone American hero, the frontier man, the Westerner being drawn back to Europe and effectively saving Europe.
I was willing to shoot Captain Reno, and I'm willing to shoot you. All right, Major, you asked for it.
So it was a wonderful fantasy for Americans as they got more deeply involved in the war.
And I think the appeal of it is that it didn't turn out all that wonderfully, that you do cry at the end, that at the same time you're not put off by the fact that there isn't a happy ending to the film.
As art, it's rubbish. As a reflection of the real war and the real political history behind the war, it's fabrication, it's a daydream. But as a daydream, as a beautiful black and white daydream, it's unbeatable.
The world will always welcome lovers as time goes by.
3 meses depois de o filme ser lançado, uma jovem de 19 anos chegou em Hollywood, sonhando fazer sucesso no cinema.
Well, when I first met Bogey, he just said it hello to me and said, I saw your test, and he said, we'll have a lot of fun together. I don't think he realized at the time quite how things would turn out. But he was right. We did have a lot of fun together.
When Hawk said, I'm going to get a leading man for you, and I don't know whether it's going to be Bogart or Cary Grant, because he had made pictures with both of them before. Hawks did. Oh, she was hoping against hope that it was Cary Grant. She didn't want to play opposite Bogart, one of these D's and Do's kind of guys, is what she thought that he was. And it didn't strike fire the first time they met, she says. But I think that she had a cap set for him. She knew what she was doing, and she landed him.
Go on, pull your guns. Go ahead. Go ahead. Get him out. You've been pushing me around long enough.
Quando as filmagens começaram, eles foram se apaixonando.
I'm hard to get, Steve. All you have to do is ask me.
You know what you're getting into. It's going to be rough.
He was tremendously helpful to me because I really knew nothing. I mean, I hadn't a clue what I was doing. 19 years old, gaga, you know, in California, working with this big star, and Howard Hawks, scared to death.
Mas havia problema. Bogart ainda estava casado com Mayo Meto.
Mayo learned about the affair. He'd hardly keep a thing like that quiet. But, as is so often the case, Bogart was a wreck, and he knew he had to get away from Mayo, but he couldn't make up his mind. He couldn't muster the courage to do it, and he broke down. There were stories of Bogart in tears, and the call telling him, you know, you've got to do this. You've got to, not just for me, you've got to do it for yourself. This is destroying you. You've got to get out of it. But he was a mess. He really was.
Bogart went through hell during that time. He tried not to be attracted to her. He tried to walk away from it. He tried, but it was doomed.
That broke as easy as you will. You're both going to take a beating till someone uses that phone. That means one of you's going to take a beating for nothing, and I don't care which one it is.
Mas o caso na vida real esquentou o romance nas telas.
What'd you do that for?
I'm wondering whether I'd like it.
What's the decision?
I don't know yet. It's even better when you help.
Stand by that wheel. Wait a minute. Give me that gun.
You can't fight them guys, Harry. It was very lucky that Bogey happened to fall in love with me, because having happened, I mean, it made everything just kind of automatically work so much better, as I imagine you must understand. Something like that might.
He did not like demure women. He liked women who, if you gave them a wisecrack, gave you a better crack back. And that's what Bacall does.
The casting of Bogart and Bacall together in this film was great, because here you had sort of the lion tamer being devoured by a cub.
She rescued him, I would say, from his own mess. Changed his life.
Bogart e Bacall se casaram em maio de 1945, em uma fazenda em Ohio, tendo pequeno grupo de familiares e amigos como convidados, junto com exército de fotógrafos.
Our love affair will be such fun, will be the envy of everyone, those famous lovers.
Tudo aconteceu 15 meses depois que eles se conheceram, 15 dias depois do divórcio de Bogart e Mayo.
To scarlet and red, when youth has
Lauren Bacall tinha 20 anos e Bogart 45, e a idade dele começava a aparecer.
He noticed some spots on his cheek that were hairless, and then patches of hair started falling out of his head too, and it was a disease which was caused by stress, and the more stressful you were, the more your hair would fall out. The more your hair would fall out, the more stressful you became. He actually started wearing a hairpiece pretty early on. If you look at the Maltese Falcon, which was done in the early 40s, that's not his hairline. He was wearing a tube. In real life, he didn't like the damn thing, and there's an awful lot of pictures. You don't see many pictures of John Wayne without his tooth, but you see a lot of pictures of Bogart without his tooth. You know, he didn't necessarily wear a hat, Bogart, to hide it. He didn't mind inflicting his baldness on other people.
Mas com ou sem cabelo, Bogart era visto como galã romântico, e com Bacall eles se tornariam o casal dourado de Hollywood. Eles continuaram seu romance nas telas no ano seguinte, em A Beira do Abismo, uma história de chantagem e assassinato em uma Los Angeles corrupta.
Sometimes I wonder what strange fate brought me out of the storm to that house that stood alone in the shadows. I probed into its mysteries. Every clue told me a different story, but each had the same ending: murder. Every instinct warned me to beware that something more dangerous, more deadly than I'd ever known before was in that room.
The Big Sleep came up, and it played on a Saturday, and I remember seeing it 3 times on the one day. Just came out of one house and joined the line for the next house, you know. It's a great movie.
I think the big appeal of The Big Sleep is, you know, apart from the fact that it's a beautifully directed film by Howard Hawks and has great set design and has, you know, a great atmosphere, is that they were a couple by that stage, and that they, you know, that the sexual chemistry between them is real. You're not just seeing 2 actors faking it really well on screen. They really were together, and you can see them sort of sending sparks off each other.
I like that. I'd like more. That's even better.
It was rather in the way once upon a time people felt they had to put Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman in a film together. Not that those two on screen ever had anything like the chemistry that Bogart and Bacall had. It's about the enjoyment that those two have in each other. I think it's an intensely erotic film. More erotic than anything in real life could be.
Depois do intervalo você vai ver. O talento de Bogart é finalmente reconhecido e ele ganha um Oscar da Academia. E a morte do galã romântico, uma tragédia anunciada.
Voltamos a apresentar Humphrey Bogart.
Em A Beira do Abismo, Bogart rondou pela escura e perigosa Los Angeles. Vagando pelas sombras da selva urbana, o seu exterior cínico e durão escondia um coração nobre. "60 anos se passaram, mas ninguém conseguiu igualar isso. Mas Bogart, o homem, era como Bogart, o detetive?"
James Cagney was asked, was Bogart tough? And Cagney said, was Bogart tough? Yeah, he was about as tough as Shirley Temple.
I think Bogart was a wonderful, wonderful screen artist. He really was. He's a great screen personality. As a person, he's the dullest person I've ever met, and a misery.
People always say he was good company if he liked you. If he didn't like you, if he turned on you, he was withering, he was rude, he made no pretense of tolerating people he didn't care for.
Well, the real Bogart was not as brave, not as wise, not as much a loner. He needed other people. He had many faults, many failings. He couldn't look after himself. He was difficult, he was nasty, he was not as charming and appealing as the screen character. He was a real man, and he was a bit of a mess, like most real people.
Mas a alquimia do cinema podia pegar a natureza contraditória de Bogart e transformá-la em ouro puro.
If you watch Bogey before the camera, you think, why is he so good? Then you see the stuff that's just been photographing, and you realise that he's absolutely outstanding. Sometimes on the screen you come across an actor who comes from the stage, and he's a brilliant actor, but it's all lost. The camera doesn't pick it up. You cannot be a top film star unless the camera falls in love with you. I know this sounds like a very corny thing, but it's true.
When he was a villain, he was a rather ordinary villain, not the most convincing, rather nasty, but not an appealing, not an interesting figure. It was when he carried some of that toughness over into heroic roles like Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon, like Rick in Casablanca. That's when it clicked. That's when you saw that some of the attributes of a villain could sit with a basic decency, put the two together. No one had really done that before, and it clicked with Bogart, and that's when he took off. That's when he became Bogart.
Ele teve outra chance de interpretar um herói em 1947, como veterano de guerra forçado a escolher entre o certo e o errado.
Key Largo, a lonely island off the coast of Florida. Sultry, heat-ridden, cloaked in the strange menace of the sea. But stranger still is the destiny that brings these people to this remote outpost, to be held at bay with a price on their lives, by a man with a price on his head.
Nothing to stop me from wiping you all out.
What good will that do, boss? Forget it. Her kind's a dime a dozen.
I'd say smack her and let it go at that.
Smacking her isn't enough for such an insult. He'd have to kill her. And he'd have to kill the rest of us because we witnessed it. To kill us all or nothing.
Are you a member of the Communist Party? I'm framing my answer in the only way in which any American citizen can frame his answer to a question which invades his, absolutely invades his.
No mesmo ano, Bogart teve a oportunidade de fazer um papel heróico de verdade. O medo do comunismo assolava Hollywood e 10 roteiristas foram indiciados por se recusarem a responder ao Comitê de Atividades Anti-Americanas se haviam sido membros do Partido Comunista.
Stand away from the stand. Fight for the Bill of Rights which was trying to destroy. Man away from the stand.
Bogart thought that he was going to be a crusader. He and the people that went to Washington with him, they went there to uphold the ideal of freedom of speech.
Bogart e Bacall lideraram um grupo de atores que foi a Washington protestar contra a perseguição e para apoiar a liberdade de acreditar no que gostavam.
They had this grim, purposeful, determined look on their faces as if they were going to go there. Well, when they went there, they found out that they were out of their element. They were babes in the woods.
As far as we were concerned, we were defending man's right to defend himself, which Mr. J. Parnell Thomas was not allowing anyone to do, as far as we could tell. And we certainly were naive, and we were novices. And I was shooting my mouth off to the Washington press saying, oh, you know, freedom, what has happened to freedom? And I was making speeches, and you know, we all were crazed about it all.
While these people went with the best of intentions, they were politically pretty innocent, I think. And in Washington, and perhaps by their own bosses in Hollywood, they were pretty well told to shut up. Keep out of this. Don't get colored in it yourself. So that I'm afraid to say most of the people who were part of that early protest went quiet.
And when he came back here, he was the first to denounce communism for all he was worth, because, first of all, it was too damn dangerous. His career was at stake, and he was not about to be labeled a commie or a pinko because of some unfriendly people in Washington.
I talked to him about it when he came back out, and he said he thought that we had made a mistake in this. And he had met with his own lawyers and advisors in the East, and this is what they had prompted him to do. No one, literally no one, had the courage to speak up. at that time. Everyone was intimidated, scared out of their wits.
Bogart voltou a fazer o que ele fazia melhor, beber e fumar com velhos amigos e com um novo conhecido, Frank Sinatra.
Famous story of their first meeting is Bogart walking up to Sinatra at a nightclub in L.A. and saying, you know, I hear you make the girls faint. Make me faint. And Sinatra looked at him and said, I'm taking the week off. And